Hi there! Welcome to Pallet University. Today we are taking a closer look at how Pokemon might be as pets instead of sort of your traditional battle partners, specifically one of the original starter Pokemon, Blastoise. If you happen to have a suggestion for a pet to cover in the future, make sure to leave that as a comment down below, and while you're down there, why not leave a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you don't like this series. That lets me know just as much information. And since you're down there already, you might as well subscribe so you don't miss the next Pokemon pet video that we put out. So, turtles in general are very, very common pets, especially back in like the 90s. It seemed like everyone and their brother had like a painted turtle or a red-eared slider. So why not a Blastoise? As with every video in this series, please go check out the YouTube channel Clint's Reptiles. Link will be the first link down in the description. This channel is where I sort of borrowed / stole this sort of whole format from. And so if you want to learn more about just animals in general and, pet reptiles specifically, going to that channel is a really great way to do it. It's somebody who's incredibly enthusiastic about what he does. He is a PhD biologist, so he really knows what he's talking about, and he's been keeping reptiles for decades. So basically any pet keeping, especially pet reptile keeping advice you could want, you can easily find it at that channel. So with that, we are here to answer the question, is Blastoise the best pet Pokemon for you? The Blastoise line, meaning both Squirtle, Wartortle, and Blastoise, gets a score of 2.8 out of 5, and that comes down to the 5 categories, which are handleability, care, hardiness, availability, and upfront costs. For handleability, the Blastoise line gets a score of 3 out of 5, and this video is going to be considerably more tame than the previous episode about Charizard is, which is a good sign for it as a pet. As a Squirtle, you can, pick it up, move it around, do pretty much whatever you want with it, really without much trouble. It's really not any larger, and in fact a slightly lighter, than, a good-sized painted turtle or red-eared slider, which I already said are, very common pets. Turtles do have quite strong bites though, but I mean, they're usually pretty easy to avoid. Turtles are not the most flexible of animals, so if you were to pick up a Squirtle, it's not like it's gonna reach around and be able to bite you. That's just not something not all. That's not something that most turtles are able to do. There are some, but they're pretty few and far between. When it gets to a Wartortle, it gets significantly larger, like about the size of a very large, probably like the largest ever recorded, like alligator snapping turtle. Wartortle's a bit larger than that. But considerably lighter, which is pretty good for you, because if you ever need to, pick up or move around your pet Wartortle, you can do that, again, without all that much difficulty. That is absolutely not the case when it gets to a Blastoise, though. So like Wartortle, Blastoise is extremely light for a turtle its size, but that doesn't mean that it's light enough for you to be able to just pick up and move around. Blastoise is roughly the size of some of the larger sea turtles, so similarly to Charizard and Feraligatr, it's big enough to sort of be handling you instead of you handling it. The biggest difference between Blastoise and either Charizard or Feraligatr is that it probably can't kill you. I mean, with an asterisk there, I'm sure its water cannons definitely could. I mean, it said they can punch through steel plates, so it probably could, but it would be much less likely, and if you're keeping it correctly, there would really be no reason for your Blastoise to ever even bring out its cannons. So the reason that they get a 3 instead of a 5 out of 5 is because, they could bite you and it would hurt. Or just because they get kind of big and unwieldy as it gets bigger, as it evolves. But also, especially as a Squirtle, they tend to be slippery because, they're in water. And, their shells are sort of made to be streamlined and slick and slippery. So there's a good chance of you dropping it, which, I mean, considering, I just rewatched the first Pokemon movie the other day, and Ash's Squirtle literally gets kicked by a Machamp, so I'm pretty sure if it can survive that without cracking its shell, if you drop it, it probably wouldn't be a major thing, but still probably not great to drop your Squirtle on its shell. Next we have Care, for which the Blastoise line gets a 0 out of 5, which you might be thinking, I mean, it's a turtle. Turtles, like I've said a couple times, are very commonly kept as pets. And yeah, while they're very frequently kept as pets, they are, in my opinion, probably by a sizable margin, the most mistreated pets, at least pet reptiles, that are like commonly kept. Like by a considerable margin. If you've seen someone's pet turtle in a tank that is less than 4 feet long, probably, that tank is too small. And, I know people who keep, their turtle in like a 10 to 20 gallon tank, which is only maybe yay long. That is way too small for a turtle. The general rule, and this is for like pond turtles, so your typical red-eared slider painted turtle. The general rule is roughly 10 gallons of water per inch of shell, like lengthwise, so like from head to tail. And so, like I've said, for like a red-eared slider or a painted turtle, they get to about 12 inches long. So for a fully grown painted turtle, you need a 120 gallon tank for just one of them. For reference, that is 4 feet by 2 feet by 2 feet. It's a sizable enclosure. And that's roughly what you would need for a Squirtle as well, because like I said, Squirtle's almost exactly the same size as like a painted turtle or something. Then, when it gets older and turns into a war turtle, you need roughly 350 gallons of water, which is roughly 6 feet by 4 feet by 2 feet. Probably a little taller than 2 feet, just so it can, stand up. War turtle itself is about 3 feet tall. So you'd probably want it to at least be 3 feet tall, probably 3.5, so it can fully stand up without bonking its head. That's a big tank. And like that kind of tank, I know would be really unreasonable for me. I could not have that here. And that's not even as big as it's gonna need to be for a Blastoise. So Blastoise's tank requirements would be a little weird, because technically, if you were just going by that general rule of 10 gallons per inch, it would need about 600 gallons, which is very big. However, that would be something you need to build yourself, because any tank, so for example, if you have ever been to like a nice hotel or some other place that has a large fish tank, that's not unheard of to have like a 600 gallon tank. However, those tanks are usually only about 2 feet wide. And so, obviously, Blastoise is wider than 2 feet. So, realistically, this would need to be a several thousand gallon tank for a Blastoise. And if you remember back to the Feraligatr episode, which you can find up in the cards, keeping an enclosure with water is not that easy. I have a leopard gecko who, number one, she's only yay big, but, she doesn't need a pond to swim in, which makes her care infinitely easier. If you were to keep something like a Chinese water dragon or a crocodilian, you need to have that water separated somehow, and you need it to be heated, which takes a special kind of water heater. You need it to be filtered and cleaned, because most animals that live in the water tend to make a lot of messes in the water. That's where they go to the bathroom. That's where they eat. That is, it's basically like, would you ever not clean your bed? You need to clean your bed eventually, no matter how often you do it, you need to clean it eventually. And so otherwise it's going to get real gross. Same thing with the water that this turtle is slash Blastoise slash Pokemon is going to be living in. Plus you need to do things like make sure like the pH of the water is good, make sure it doesn't get like too salty, or a million other things that if you've ever kept like a large fish tank, you're probably well aware of. On top of that, you can't have it just be a fish tank. You need to have a place for them to go onto land if they want to get out of the water. And on that piece of land, there needs to be lights, specifically probably ultraviolet lights, because that is how, at least in our world, turtles make their vitamin D. Otherwise their shells can become really deformed and really, really sad and really painful for the animal if they don't get enough ultraviolet light. It's just a very large, similarly to like someone who's like, oh, let me get this tortoise. One of the most commonly kept species of tortoise, and granted pond turtles and tortoises are very different, but like when you get it, the most commonly kept species of tortoise from my experience are called sulcata tortoises, which are the third largest species of tortoise in the world. When you get it, it's like smaller than a football. When you get it, it's going to be 200 pounds and have the strength to tip over a refrigerator. That's not unheard of. People don't expect that when you buy this little football thing, that it's going to be able to, flip over refrigerators, flip over your washing machine. This is the exact same thing. Next up, we have hardiness, for which the Blastoise line gets a score of 5 out of 5. Turtles are literally and figuratively the most solid pet reptiles you can possibly get, which is a good thing and a bad thing. So they are hardy in that it takes a lot to you sort of screw them up. However, if you are screwing them up or screwing up something with their care, you won't know. Reptiles in general are very good at hiding their problems, much like many people. But, they're very good at not letting their keepers know that something in their care is wrong, until one day they just die. Turtles are like that a lot, in that you won't know that you're doing something wrong until it is really, really negatively impacting that turtle/Pokemon. However, assuming that you follow general turtle care things, they should be fine for you. And so, the only thing that I would really be nervous about is, like I said, dropping your Squirtle. As a Wartortle or a Blastoise, probably not as big of a thing because you won't be picking it up and moving it around as much. And then also just general water quality things and that UV lights. Other than that, if you have those, it'll probably be fine. Next, for availability, the Blastoise line gets a score of 4 out of 5. Like with Charizard and Feraligatr, you can probably get one captive bred from, the same breeders that the professors get one from. However, because of that, and because they are a starter Pokemon, they're probably in pretty high demand. So, you might be able to find one just by, doing the Pokemon World's equivalent of Googling, but you might not. I definitely think it'd be in, less demand than, a Charmander, because, everyone and their brother loves Charizard, even though, as we've talked about, it is a horrible pet. So you'd be able to find one probably more easily than a Charizard, or Charmander rather. But who knows? If you really were dedicated, I'm sure you could probably find one without that big of a problem. Plus, unlike I talked about with Charizard, it's probably not regulated or illegal to own anywhere, so that's a plus. And for the last category, we have upfront cost, for which the Blastoise line gets a score of 2 out of 5. Captive bred Squirtles would be in pretty high demand, but like I said, not as in as high of a demand as, say, a Charmander, just because they're not as popular. So because of that, just because of how supply and demand works, they'd probably be cheaper, but the Pokemon itself would not be even close to the most expensive part of getting this thing as a pet. As is generally the case for pretty much any pet reptile, the most expensive thing that you're going to get is the enclosure. And that's certainly true. For me, like I said, I have a leopard gecko. The gecko cost about $24, $25. The enclosure that I have her set up in, probably close to 100, probably over 100 realistically. I mean, I bought the tank secondhand, but if I were to buy that tank new, just the tank itself would be like $150, not including anything that's in it. So, and this holds true for Blastoise as well, but especially true because probably for Squirtle you could buy, a pre-made tank for Squirtle to be in, maybe even for Wartortle. That might be pushing it, but I could conceivably see them being, pre-made things that you could go buy. That is not the case for Blastoise at all. For the tank for Blastoise, you would absolutely need to build that for yourself, which probably would be cheaper. If you did that for Wartortle as well, would probably be cheaper than going out and buying a pre-made one, just because very large tanks tend to be very, very expensive. And so building one yourself, if you have that ability, or pretty crafty, probably not all that expensive, relative. But man, building a couple 1,000-gallon enclosure for a Blastoise, that's going to cost you. And that's not even including the equipment needed to heat the water, clean the water, and all the UV lights, because those only last for about a year before they need to be replaced. And because Blastoise is a big Pokemon, you would need a very large array of them, so it's not getting all of its UV just in one spot, and probably get a really bad sunburn, or probably maybe in some form of cancer. Who knows? I don't know how illnesses work in the Pokemon world. But yeah, you need a very large array of UV lights to spread it out over a larger area. So that's less expensive, and I keep comparing it to Charizard just because they're starter Pokemon from the same generation, rather popular Pokemon. Not as expensive as Charizard, just because you don't need to fireproof your room and probably your entire house. That this is something that you probably could build even outside, depending on where you lived. That probably wouldn't be horribly expensive. Certainly less expensive than keeping a Charizard, but still not cheap at all. And that is why the Blastoise line gets a score of 2.8 out of 5. Turtles do truly make really good pets. However, they are a lot of work. You know, they are not the same thing as getting a leopard gecko. You know, I could not handle a turtle right now if I wanted one. And so, because of that, there are a lot of turtles that need new homes. I'm sure if you looked on your local Craigslist, you know, because apparently people still use Craigslist, I don't know. But if you look on your local Craigslist, I am positive you will find, especially if you live in like a decently populated area, a number of turtles that need to be rehomed. And now that you're more familiar, granted this was about Blastoise, but this was about turtles in real life in general as well. Now that you're more informed about you know, what turtles really need to be happy and healthy, maybe consider rehoming one, giving these cute little guys nice homes. Make sure to follow us on Twitter as well at Pallet_U to keep up on all things Pokemon science, as well as if you feel like our content is worthy of supporting financially. We do have a Patreon, the link to which will be down in the description as well. Thank you so much to our patrons over at Patreon, Patty Murphy. So once again, I'm bulking a lot of these videos for when I'm sort of AFK around the holidays. So if you have since joined Patreon, your support is also greatly appreciated. Just know that I haven't had time to edit you in yet. And lastly, thank you so much for watching, and as always, there's a time and place for everything.